up for my newsletter, hear from me once a month, see what else I'm working on, you can sign up at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comics, or if you read on Amazon Kindle or read digitally, you can go to Amazon. I'll sign them in the middle. If not, I'll have them on another show. Otherwise, let's continue with the comic making process. Let's see here. Where are my Morningstar layouts? Okay, so longest pages I've worked on in ages. It's probably, I mean, I've shown you the figures before. Posing figures in the poses from the layout, having something to draw from. And I'll tell you, interestingly enough, watching the Drink and Draw live stream, Dave Johnson, Joe Quesada's in a lot of episodes, Jeff Johnson, Ben DeFeo, all those guys, they usually have on have reference. Even when he's drawing something out of his head, he likes to just have some reference there, because they were talking about his reference library and all of the books that he has to pull from, boots I made up out of my head. And I realized that just by pulling up a picture online of like female women's cowboy boots, that the boots I have here are completely wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and erase these boots and draw some new ones and try to, add a little bit more verisimilitude, I believe is the word. Anyway, so at this women's footwear, you might be a little bored by this one, because this is probably going to be me just sitting here fixing these boots the whole episode. All right. You know what? Originally, I was just going to have this. I have a screen above my drawing tablet that has my reference on it, but I realized I really should just send this image over. Let's see. Let me see if I can just send this directly to the iPad so you guys can see it. Because then you'll at least have some reference point for what it is that I'm changing and why. So let me see here. Yeah, I know. Watching someone do, moving files around, it's riveting comic book creation, isn't it? But you know what? This isn't about being dramatic or riveting or any of that kind of stuff. This is about showing the creative process. And for me, a lot of the creative process is, oh, wait a sec, here we go. I'm curious if there's any sound quality difference to you guys, whether it sounds quieter, more echoey. So let me know if it's at all different, because I may be able to set it up so that I use the camera I'm using right now for the visuals, and then use the other camera's microphone just for audio. But I definitely like this sound better. Let's see. Amar's in the chat, says hello to everybody. He says cutting his hair off. I'll be back in a bit before the stream ends. Damn, give yourself the quick shave. All right, go on. Got to take care of the personal grooming. In these days of quarantine, you can't just let everything go shaggy. So it's good that you're keeping it up. Go do that. We'll see you in a bit. All right. Meanwhile, what was I? That's what I was going to do. I was going to add, insert. Let's see here. I think this is the one I just added. There we go. So, make this a little bit bigger. Big enough that's close to full size, but not so much that it's taking up a lot of real estate. And then let's move this above the letters, because the lettering's a little bit distracting. So this boot is just one that I just grabbed from online, and I'm going to use that as reference for redrawing the boots here. And as you can see, just the styling on these on the actual boots The fact that it has the split down the middle in the front, and then rounded on the sides, and the little loops on the inside. The toes are a little bit pointier than I have them, even though I did draw them as kind of pointy. These little details are the kind of things that I'm like, well, let me try and just get the details better. And the fact that they're actually a little bit less tapered than the boots that I originally drew. They're a little bit more of a straight barrel. So let's get in here. And oh wait, that was the one thing I wanted to do, was before I started this, to duplicate this layer, so that way if I completely, not layer, but yeah, duplicate the whole layer. What I started doing, in fact, let me zoom back out real quick so I can show you. What I started doing was, as I was going along, if I got to a point where I wanted to make some drastic changes to the page, what I did was I just duplicated the whole page. That way I can just come back to wherever I'm at before. If I screw it up, I can just, it's like an undo, except without having to undo a ton of layers. I can just kind of go back. Then before this, there was that. So I just went through, and each time before I went and said, all right, for instance, I really hated the original pose I had of Ariel sitting on Remiel's shoulders, getting ready to cut his head open, or chopping his head open. So I know this is pretty grisly. But as I went through and I changed each of those things, I would just create a new layer. And now I'm going to create I'm going to duplicate this entire layer. That way, if I really don't do a good job with the boots, then I can just come back to this version. Because other than that, and finishing Muriel's facial hair in this bottom panel, the boots are the last thing. And in fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this page and finish the face first, then do the boots. So this is another thing about me that I want you guys to see, is that a lot of times I'll go in and I'll start doing A and be like, wait, let me do B first. Or wait, I should do C instead. Just reordering these things, because cognitively, it just helps me manage what I think will lead to the best results. So flipping the page just to check, make sure that things aren't looking wonky. They feel like there's a slight bit of wonk here. Not horribly wonky, but just enough that I want to tinker with it a little bit more. And I'm totally doing the thing that I was very much afraid of working digitally, where I'm really going in and nitpicking and reworking a lot of details. And I'm like, am I really going to need all of this detail when I'm actually inking? And I am not sure. It remains to be seen. Let's see. And Gaming Artist is in the chat. Says, sorry, I'm a bit late. No worries. Happy to have you on. One of the things I've been meaning to do for a long time, by the way, I thought of you, Gaming Artist, because you had mentioned sending me some artwork to look at. One of the things that I've been meaning to do for a while is create a Patreon tier for feedback, where I would have a separate live stream that I'd maybe rebroadcast elements of it, but basically just have a separate, like a Zoom call, where I'm going to have people get on with me, and I can draw over their work, talk with them, give them feedback. So that's going to be something that's going to be on the Patreon feed. But in the meantime, what I need to do is set up a Discourse server so that people can directly put artwork right in there. When I first set up Patreon, they set it up so you can have a Discourse server, which is basically like a forum for your Patreon account, your Patreon subscribers. And I didn't see myself using it that often, so I didn't really I can't remember if I set it up or whether I may not have set it up, or I just set it up and then never used it. But that, the Patreon Discourse server is probably going to be the easiest way to share artwork for discussion. So I do need to do that. I need to check whether it's already set up. And if it's not, I need to set it up. And if it is, then I need to make the information public and repost it on the community channel here, so you guys can all see and know how to get on there. So Gaming Artist asks how everybody's been. I've been well. I've been, like I said, I've been taking a long time with this particular page, but it's a long time in a good way. I'm really trying to, I mean, this is the last issue of this series. If I'm going to end it, I'm going to end it on as high a note as possible. So I'm really taking my time and just saying, part of it is that I'm not rushing to get this book ready for a particular convention. Originally, I was hoping that I'd be done in time for WonderCon, and obviously WonderCon would have already come and gone. Realistically, if I was going to have anything ready for WonderCon, it would have been the sketchbook edition. But I'll tell you honestly, right now, I'm wondering whether I'm even going to bother doing a sketchbook edition, because I don't really see the convention season coming back in 2020. So maybe it may not be until 2021. And I am very seriously considering just maybe getting a small number of the final issue printed by itself for people who've been reading up till now. My cat Kachu is very upset to hear that I'm thinking about going straight to trade on the volume 2. But that's what I'm thinking about doing, is just going, get a small number of issue 8 printed, and people can mail order those from me, or if they've been reading on Comixology, then they can go directly there. But then just getting the trade for the second issue out, because conventions are where the predominant number of my sales come from. And if we're not doing conventions, then might as well just make the trade available so people can go right to that. So I don't know. What do you guys think? How do you guys feel about that? Another thing that I have been thinking about on the self-publishing side is going back, and right now the single issues you can just buy directly from me at conventions, or you could order them from my website, but you could only order the issues that aren't in the first trade. So the first trade has issues 1 through 4. So I have issues 5, 6, and 7 available on the website. What I'm thinking about doing is reformatting all of the issues so that the content that's in the sketchbook, along with a bunch of thumbnails and the script, put all of those into kind of a deluxe version. So it'd be like a 48-page book, and maybe make each issue available, maybe draw new covers for them, and have like a 48-page book that's available on Amazon for people to buy. That way, if people wanted to read the individual issues, they could. I'm thinking about it. I don't know. Maybe have those and then just have an omnibus. See here. Now this is the challenge I always have, is making sure that when I'm drawing that I keep drawing, because a lot of times when I'm talking, and this is not your guys' fault, this is my fault, but I stop concentrating and I just sort of just make marks as opposed to specifically trying to keep the storytelling in the front of my mind. Because there's also little things like remembering to use a light touch. I tend to be a heavy-handed artist. I think it's a problem a lot of artists have. It's not unusual. And the way that I dealt with it in figure drawing was by using 6B pencils, which, if you go heavy-handed with that, you'll basically it's all hard, very dark black marks. So I'm doing the same thing with digital, which I think with any surface, it's really easy to injure your hand by pressing really hard. It doesn't matter whether you're working digital or traditional. So what I tend to do is work with mediums that are very dark, that force me to draw lightly. The only problem with that is that occasionally when I'm doing something that with a very light or a very hard medium, if I'm drawing with like a mechanical pencil or something, I find that I'm like not getting anything at all because I'm used to getting very dark marks by just lightly grazing the paper. And then we see more folks on the chat. We see Aleski's in the chat. It says 2 weeks in a row. What? And yeah, 2 weeks in a row. Well, this one was going to be a special one because I had some guests scheduled, and they may still pop in before the end of the stream. But if not, I'll have the guys from Crypto Comics on another time. So it's generally the schedule's still going to be live stream every 2 weeks. This week was an exception. But what I'll do is the next live stream will be 2 weeks after this week. So, and I'll schedule it ahead of time. That's something I'm getting better about, is putting the schedule for the next one right after I finish this one. But yeah, so glad to have you, glad to be here for you guys. Gaming Artist asks, what comics are you planning to do after Morningstar? Well, I have a sequel planned for my graphic novel, Eye of the Gods, which is a psychological thriller. I have a sequel to that one. And I think instead of doing the whole book, I'm going to write a short story that's basically the first chapter and see how people respond to that. And depending on how sales are, then I'll either continue with that, or I will. I have a political thriller that's kind of in the vein of V for Vendetta that I want to do. It's kind of like a futuristic story, but the fact that it's set in the future is only because it's sort of like, it's not to be a science fiction story. It's about exploring where we are culturally right now and where I could possibly see society ending up if we keep going in these directions. So that is another story that I have planned. And then I have a reinterpretation of a mythological tale that I want to do. So I've got 3 books on deck, and I'm kind of equally passionate about all of them. So my plan is this. When I finish Morningstar, I'm going to sit down and get back into the habit of writing daily. And from now on, I'm just going to write every day and just whatever, because I think that the thing that slows me down the most in these working on these projects is not necessarily, yes, the drawing does take a very long time. But what happens is I will draw an issue, and then I go back and I write the next issue. And even if I have a pretty strong outline, that process of bringing the dialogue in, I have to get my head into the writing process, and that ends up taking a long time. And then honing it, getting the script to where I'm happy with it and ready to draw, refining the outline, and then getting back. By the time I do all of that, a month or 2 has gone by because I'm only writing in small chunks. And then by the time I finish that, I have to get back into drawing, and I haven't been drawing in a long time, and then I start thumbnailing, and the whole process repeats itself. And what I realized, or what I'm going to try, I've mentioned this before in previous streams earlier this year, is that I'm going to try just writing every day, no matter what. And then the idea is that hopefully I won't have to do this start-stop anymore, and I'll always have something to draw, and I'll always have something to write. And as long as I'm doing both, hopefully I will just continue to improve at both, and I won't have to do this whole, it feels like it's starting from scratch each issue I work on. And I want to eliminate that feeling, or at least minimize it. So let's see here. Who else in the chat? Aleski tells MR, steady hands, good luck. Aaron's in the chat. How you doing, Aaron? Good to see you again, man. And Amar says, I do have steady hands, and you're back. And he said, yeah, we're talking about the writing. He says, that's why I want to have all of my stories written beforehand. Some people do it on the fly, but when you have a developing, changing world, you need to know what you're drawing before you start. Yes, I agree with that. I think for me, the reason why I want to get into the writing every day is not because, for me, it's less about writing on the fly than it is keeping my writing muscles strong. Because I realized for me that the big problem was, it was less about the planning, because I've had an outline for the whole series from the beginning. I mean, it's Lucifer's Fall from Heaven. You know it's going to end with him falling. It's, that's not the brain surgery. The brain surgery is the individual arcs and the characterizations of the personalities in the story. But my big problem was simply that, if I would go, if I wrote detailed scripts for the entire series, then that means, okay, I've got everything written out. Now I'm not writing for a good 5 years while I'm drawing the whole series. And then when I come back, it would literally feel like, well, it would feel like I haven't written in 5 years. So for me, realizing that I need to write every day and build that muscle and become as good a writer as I am an artist. And that's not saying that I'm a dope artist, but I'm just saying I've spent far more time working at this craft than I have at writing. And again, I'm parroting things that I've said in the past, but I need to build up that writing muscle the same way I built up that drawing muscle, and I need to keep it built up. I need to make sure that once I get to the level I want to be, that I'm still writing every day. So, but no, I completely agree with you in terms of having everything. For me, it would be like having my entire world written out, and then while I'm drawing the book, I'm also in the background working on writing the next world. And by that logic, realistically, I should already be working on doing that now while I'm finishing Morningstar. But this book has taken so long, not in a bad way, but when I switch to this process of writing every day, I feel like it's going to be a big jump in terms of how I cognitively process my creative schedule. And I kind of want to just finish giving Morningstar 110% of my attention before I start a new project. It's like in my mind, I have a set idea of the standard of my artwork, the speed at which I put it out, the quality it's going to be. And I do know that splitting my attention is going to cause a shift, possibly a drop in artistic quality for a little while until I adjust. And I don't want that to interfere, that fear that my work is going to be crappy. I don't want that to interfere with me finishing up Morningstar. If I come into a new project, a brand new project, it's almost like I can mentally tell myself, okay, this is a different process. It's going to look different. And I can be okay with that. But with Morningstar, I really want this thing to end feeling like on a high note. So I'm trying to give it all I got. And Amar says, yeah, after I finish these next issues, I feel like I should have a pretty good idea of how long it takes to do a series based on a set number of chapters. Let's see here. Yeah, and that's another thing that I am thinking about is with these new series, I'm also thinking about trying to write them for social media. I'm thinking about doing them as almost like webcomics on Instagram and trying to write it such that I'm writing short stories that I want each issue to feel more like it has a beginning, middle, and end, but that will build up to an overall arc. I should probably go back and watch a bunch of Batman the Animated Series and Justice League Action to get myself into that mindset of writing compressed stories. Because to be honest, I haven't written a lot of short stories. My first book I published on my own was a complete graphic novel, even though it was broken into chapters. I mean, I've done short stories in the past, but I don't think that I've brought them to I don't think I've built up that muscle of doing the complete beginning, middle, and end in, say, 8, 10, 12 pages. I've done it, but doing it is not the same as being really good at it. And I want to get really good at it. Let's see. I see Joseph in the chat. How you doing? Thanks for joining us. And Amar said, is your guest going to be on today? And I don't know. I sent them a text message, and I gave them the link to join in. So I don't know for sure if they're going to come or not. So, we'll be on for an hour. And that's the nice thing is even if a guest isn't able to make it, we can still do our own thing because this is what we usually do. Hang out, draw, talk process. You know what? I don't like the lines I just made here. I was trying to make sure that you got the sense that that Uriel, that you could still see his wings, even though Ariel is standing on his shoulders. But I also feel like these lines are interfering too much, like they're distracting from, say, these impact lines that I'm going to, you know what, I really don't need to sit here and fuss with these because I'm going to be inking these anyway. I can tighten them up when I ink them. Let's just get on to what I originally was talking about, which was drawing these boots. So where's that layer with the reference? Here's the reference. Let's move this over here. Let's go back to the sketch layer. Oh, that's what I needed to do. I needed to duplicate this layer. Turn off the other one. Let's see. Joseph has a question in the chat, or comment. Has a comment. He says, although I draw portraits for people, okay, let me move this over here so it's in front of me. There we go. Although I draw portraits for people, I did some rough sketches for my comic book and realized how much I suck at comic book drawing. I suck at human anatomy, shading. I'm practicing, however. I think that is a very, very common problem for a lot of artists. From what I have seen in my life, generally speaking, this is a generalization, artists tend to fall into two categories. They tend to fall into categories of artists that are observational versus imaginative. Observational artists are like human cameras. They're really great at photorealism. They can look at something and draw, even if it's not an exact replica, they can make it look very realistic and look very much like the thing they're observing. Hence portraits, doing still life studies, landscapes, traditional portraits that you see like hanging galleries, like, that people have sat for. So it's a very, very useful skill. The challenge, though, is the imagination, is when you don't have any reference at all and you're just making stuff up. Then you have the imaginative side, which tends to be, for instance, obviously comic books require quite a bit of imaginative drawing because you have to draw people in a lot of different poses and positions. Animation is extremely imaginative. I mean, you literally have to, even more so than comic book artists, be able to revolve things in your mind to draw things from any different angle because you're drawing things moving through space. So animation, concept designers, for video games and film and TV, storyboard artists, those tend to be imaginative drawing artists. And I fall more into the second category of an imaginative artist. And I struggle with portraits and representational drawing. That's why a lot of my work, even when I'm drawing from reference, like you're going to see when I do these boots, I may draw them so that, these look like the boots, but they're going to look kind of like a cartoony version of the boots, as opposed to saying, this is the exact boot that this person's wearing, just change in a different direction. That said, the artists that I find that I think are the ones that people tend to be most impressed by. And this is not like, I just want to be impressive. I'm just saying, let me just say it like this. The ones that I think are the best artists are the ones that can combine both. Artists who have there's a very, very few who I think do it naturally, but I think that there are artists who maybe start off imaginative and they work to build their representational skills, and there are artists that start off representational and work to build their imaginative skills. So the fact that you're already practicing is a good step. And I think, that's the fact that you are aware of this, you're already asking yourself these questions is a good sign. The fact that you can see that difference and you can start trying to learn, that's a good step. So that's the best advice I can give you, is to continue on with that path. If you're more of an observational artist, maybe a good experiment is to, I don't know, try to draw something out of your head first, and then go find an actual picture of the thing. Or maybe you take an object that you have. Let's say that you've got, for instance, where is it? Let me see if I can grab this thing without destroying everything behind me. Oh, it's just sitting around the shelf. So I got me a skull for reference. Got this guy. And I don't do studies for me as often as I should have, but I've got him there if I need to do it. I originally bought this guy just to sit on a table and draw from, pose it in different angles so I can build that capacity to draw this from any angle, but actually have it look realistic. Because I can draw imaginative skulls and they may look like they're from these angles, but the bones will be out of proportion, or it will be like, that's not really how a jaw attaches. That's where the imaginative side comes in. The imaginative side, I can make stuff up and I can make it convincing, but you'll look at it, it's like, that's not really what a skull looks like from that angle. So what you can do is you can test yourself by taking any object that you have that you would do a study from, and first try to do 2 or 3 sketches from it from your imagination. Then bring in the real object, pose it in the same pose as what your imaginative thing is, and compare the 2 drawings side by side, compare the object side by side, and then try redrawing it from observation. And then once you've got your drawing from observation and you've got your imaginative drawing, try and redraw it again from your imagination. That way you're going back and forth and back and forth. And the idea is you want to push your imaginative mind and your observational mind together. You want to meld them like steel. And I think like one of the artists who I think is the best and amazing at that is Drew Struzan. And we all think of Drew Struzan as a photorealistic artist because of all the great movie posters he's done. If you haven't seen his work, he's the guy who did all of the Star Wars posters, the Harry Potter posters. He's an amazing artist. I got a chance to meet him once at there's a gallery exhibition in Hollywood for some of his works. I got a chance to actually talk with him for a little bit. And it was funny because I actually got to see a lot of his work up close, and he was actually telling me about the process. And what a lot of people don't necessarily know is, he would airbrush in the general figures, and then all the detail work, he's drawing that in colored pencil. Because a lot of times if there needs to be revisions or changes, he's got to work on a fly. He doesn't have time to wait for a painting to dry. So he'll go in there and he's just drawing, erase, correct, and it was just amazing to hear him, talk about his process. But he's somebody who, he also had a lot of his personal works there. And you can see pieces that he's drawn from his imagination. And you can see that he has an equal mastery of observational drawing and imaginative drawing. And, I don't know which one he did learn first as a child. I wish I had thought to ask him that. But that's, but it's just that's the thing. The type of people that we're astounded with tend to be people who can do both. So, I mean, Kim Jong-yi is somebody that we're all impressed with and love. He is somebody who has pushed his imaginative drawing. He's almost like he's the more imaginative version of Drew Struzan, because you see that he's drawing things from every angle possible. And he understands how to revolve things in space. And his things don't look photorealistic, but his placement of objects in space is so realistic that it creates a sense of imaginative authenticity to it. So those are 2 things right there that I find awesome. But that's an example of what I'm talking about. We're pushing those 2 things together. So let me get back to the chat here real quick. So Joseph says, yes, he definitely agrees with the 2 categories. And Amar said, let me know if you ever need someone on your stream as a guest to talk art. I'll tell you what, let's put it in the books right now. So 2 weeks from now, Amar, let's have you on the show. When this is done and I set up the schedule, the following one, I'll send you a link for that, and then I'll maybe remind you a day or 2 before. But we'll, if you're free, then we'll lock it down. And again, if something comes up and you're not able to make it, it's easy going. We'll schedule something else. But yeah, I've been meaning to have you on so we can hang out and talk for a while now. So Joseph says I fall into the first category, being the observational artist. However, I do believe I will eventually become good at the second category, right? However, right now I hate whatever I sketch. And I think that that's true for most artists. When you're working on something that you're not good at, you're gonna hate the results because you have this other skill that is your go-to, that people praise you for. So when we're doing something and we know we're not good at it, instinctually we want to run to our comfort zone and we feel bad about doing the thing that we're bad at. But the only way to improve is to confront those weaknesses. And it doesn't have to be a traumatic thing. I think that that's another way to really look at it. Some people really hate exercise. Some people love going to the gym and working out. My wife loves to swim. She loves going to the pool. And doing laps. I think that looking at these studies, whatever you're trying to do, whichever skill set you're trying to build, to look at it as it's you working on creative self-improvement, but it shouldn't have to be a hassle. If you can reframe it so that it's like going to the gym, and you know how sometimes for people that work out, when you do something you've never done before, you push your body farther than you ever have before, you get an exhilaration, you get a adrenaline rush from pushing yourself, whether it's like bench pressing more than you've ever bench pressed before, or like getting a new time, in doing laps of the pool or running on a track and doing a time you've never done before. You're like, you feel amazed that you pushed yourself. And I try to think of these challenges that we have in trying to improve our craft. I try to think of it in those similar terms where it's much more about you're pushing yourself to improve and to do things you've never done before, as opposed to, oh, I suck and I'm mad at myself. Just try to think of it as you're the only person you're competing with is yourself. So just enjoy that testing and pushing. I know there's some comments in the chat here. I'm going to get caught up real quick. Let's see. Wonky Art says, awesome. I'm glad I was able to catch it. Catch this live. Hey, everybody. Hey, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you could make it. Joseph, I also noticed that you said, yeah, why doesn't movie studios hire Drew Struzan for their posters anymore? It boggles my mind. Well, honestly, it comes down to money. They are cheap bastards, and a lot of the studios it's cheaper for them to just get a bunch of photographs from the set or publicity photos of the actors, Photoshop them together into a composition, and the amount that they pay a graphic designer is a lot less than they pay a master artist like Drew Struzan. And then it's also easy for them to change it. They just go in and say, nope, make this actor's head bigger. This actor is getting smaller billing, make it smaller. And they just Photoshop is something that has a vague Struzan-esque feel to it without actually having, somebody really paint it. A lot of directors like Guillermo del Toro, I know for a couple of his movies, he actually paid to have Drew Struzan do the painting for it because he wanted a Drew Struzan movie poster. There's directors like him, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, that genuinely appreciate classic movie poster art, and Struzan in particular. And they'll pony up and get him to do projects like that. But very few studios and movies that are made these days have somebody behind the wheel who has a sense of it's not even that people don't have a sense of appreciation of it. I think that there probably are directors and screenwriters and producers that do still appreciate Struzan, but the people in the marketing departments don't. And they're simply looking at what's our budget for movie posters. And they're like, we can't afford Drew Struzan. Just get this designed by somebody in-house, or have some shop that does key art crank out some designs for us. So it is a shame that they don't have him making projects like that anymore. I think he still does some work here and there, but I mean, I know that he's still doing artwork, but I can't remember the last time I saw him doing a movie poster thing. I actually should go by his website or his Twitter or see if he's on Instagram, see what he's up to. Because I know the man still makes art. He's still actively an artist creating, but I'm not sure how much of that is just private work for private collectors versus stuff that's at all related to entertainment. But it is amazing, and he should be getting a lot more. People should be ponying up for some Drew Struzan movie posters. Let's see. And Joseph also says, watched Robert Marzullo. He teaches drawing human anatomy by drawing basic shapes like cylinders, cubes, spheres, then expanding on it. Makes a lot of sense. It's funny. Let me see if they're in easy reach. I bought a set of children's wooden blocks, and it's like a box with like 20 or 25 pieces that are just wooden blocks, cubes, cylinders, no spheres, but all sorts of variety of shapes. And I bought these with the intent to just make compositions for me to practice studying from, to improve my skill at depicting shapes and volumes, but depicting them in perspective. So there's little things like that you can also do. Is just having physical, and you don't need to go out and buy things like this. This is kind of a luxury. You could just use a box or a shoe, or tissue box, or a stack of books, just any physical objects that are squarish around the house in different shapes, and combine them in compositions to help practice those types of things. But yeah, understanding how to assemble any primitive volume will help improve the ability to to imagine a wide variety of volumes and shapes. So sounds like a good way to study. Let's see here. Amar also says that's the approach I always take as well. I start out imaginative. That includes realism as well. Now I'm a lot more imaginative than realistic, but I flip-flop a lot. And Joseph says, that's exactly what I want to do right now as a side job, draw realistic portraits for people. It's a good side job. I mean, drawing portraits is hard, particularly because, the person you're trying to please is that client. And if you think about the fact that people rarely like photographs of themselves, it's even worse with a painting. And even if you do try to accentuate the flattering, I think there can still be a lot of, it's anytime you're making art for anyone other than yourself, it's always challenging to appease those masters, as it were. Iron Rock says, I decided to selfishly go for cartooning. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out here with this boot. I want to get it at just, what? See, that's the challenge here. This is the reason why I wanted to leave why I'm duplicated this layer, because I do feel like I have a good shape for that shoe there, but it's just not the right shape. And this is the challenge, is trying to go from the vague and generic into the specific. Because I think that the way I previously had the boot drawn in really did accentuate the shape of her calf a little bit. Gave her some volume, some structure. And actually, here's a nice thing. So the boot I've got there, it has stitching on it. And what I can do is I can use that stitching to help as work as a cross axis. Or rather, like, let's say the heel is up here, I can kind of give that sense of that, and then run the stitching straight up the middle of the boot. Have it curve out just a little bit. And you can actually use stitching to create these sense of volumes around it. So where you would normally put the construction lines, that's actually an interesting thing I found, is you can use like the seam on a shirt or the seam on the around the armpit of a shirt or anywhere that there would be some sort of stitching on a piece of clothing. You can use those things as construction lines. You're actually hiding your construction line into the drawing you're doing. So that's a handy thing that I sort of discovered over the years taking classes, particularly with my instructor Carl Ganas. He has a class on costume and draped figure, and I've used, that's one of the things I've picked up is, oh wait, I can use the actual structure of the clothing to hide construction lines. So Lesky says, top talk on dualism of art approaches. This has been most thought-provoking. I'm glad to hear it. It's one of those things that I often kind of tried to figure out, well, why is it that I'm bad at some things? Or well, really, it came down to the fact that when I first started taking figure drawing seriously, I had avoided it for many, many years because I was bad at it. And I remember at one point I just said, well, I guess I'm just not somebody who can draw from observation. And I just presumed that's my weakness. I'm never going to, it's not what I'm going to do. So I just never used to go to figure drawing classes. And then after many, many years of just drawing in high school and college, when I finally started taking classes in the animation program and I saw, oh, wait, this is a skill that you can learn. I was like, oh, it's just, I'm always going to be bad at it unless I put some work into it and actually learn to improve. And once I realized that, it made me realize also when I looked at people who just naturally were able to just look at something and depict it like a photograph, like a camera, I was envious. But then I started realizing, well, wait a minute. If that's a skill that can be learned, then maybe imagination is a skill that can be learned. And when I say imagination, I do not mean creativity. I mean being able to conceive of objects in your mind and say, oh, this is what this thing would look like. To be able to just make up structures in your mind. To construct a mental picture of what this block looks like turned at this angle. That's what I mean by imagination. And that really kind of changed my whole perception about everything creative. I started realizing that we all come into this world with certain advantages, but that doesn't mean that we are unable to learn any of the skills that we don't have, any of those disadvantages. And I see Trevor Nielsen's in the chat. Hey, good to hear from you, man. Just when's the next book expected? Well, let's see. Right now, I am on, this is flipped backwards, but I think this is page 12. This is page 12 of the 40-page final issue. I want to say that I'm going to be done inking the book probably before the end of summer, hopefully gray toned. And then I mentioned at the top of this video that I'm going to make a small number, a very small print run of issue 8 because I'm not going to be doing the convention season, and then after that I'm going to probably go to the trade for the second volume sooner rather than later. So there's probably end of summer, issue 8 will be published, and then before the end of the year, the book edition of volume 2 will be out. So that is my tentative schedule for right now. So let's see. Wonky Art says a great trick with the stitches to help contour the human form. I'll try that out right now with the drawing I'm working on. Thanks. You're very, very welcome. Anytime I can share something that's useful and helpful, I am happy to do it. And Amar says, I used to love figure drawing. Now, I'm curious, does that mean that you don't have the time to figure draw anymore, or you used to love it, but you have fallen out of love? Amar also says, I look at talent as one's perception to execute a skill. Some have better perception than others, but that can be learned. I 100% agree. And Trevor says, sweet, are you going to run a crowdfund for it? I am not for this project, and it's not that I have anything against crowdfunding. It's that I actually I have a genuine appreciation for how much work it is to run a successful campaign. Um, I've supported many a crowdfunding campaign, many Indiegogo campaigns, many Kickstarter campaigns. I am a strong believer in it. But if I don't have time to run a campaign properly and put the full effort behind it, it seems like it's better to not run a crowdfunding campaign than to run a crappy one. So I want to wait until I have Morningstar done, and I'm putting all of my energy towards that. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing crowdfunding campaigns for issue 1 of whatever the next project I do is, and kind of start from scratch there in terms of the crowdfunding world. The other thing I might do is I've mentioned doing a director's cut of Morningstar, where basically I've got the sketchbook combined into each issue, and basically just putting in tons of thumbnails, the full script for each issue, and basically make it like each issue will be like a booklet, not even a booklet, but a small book, like a novella-sized book that has the 24 pages of art that makes up that issue. Then tons of thumbnails, the script, any additional sketches and reference, almost like here's the story, and then here's how I built this issue, and just do that for each issue. And I'm not saying I'm definitely going to do that, but if I crowdfund Morningstar, that's probably going to be what I'm going to do. So, yeah, I'm still thinking a lot of these things out, and a lot of it really comes down to bandwidth, because I consider myself very fortunate to still have a full-time day job, but that also means that I only have a limited amount of time each week to put towards comic books as a business. And if most of that time is spent, I don't know, running Kickstarter campaigns, working on the business side, it's sort of like it means I get no time to actually draw. And at a certain point, I have to decide, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to run a Kickstarter campaign, or do I want to just draw? And I think if I were trying to make a living from my art, obviously I would put a much higher premium on those campaigns. But I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where that isn't the situation right now. And because of that, I want to put my time towards the actual just creating. Because in the end, that's what I got into this for, is the creating. Although I do look at my Patreon as a form of crowdfunding, because I am publishing each issue on Patreon as I've been publishing them in 5-page increments, like a webcomic, on my Patreon page, and people can read them digitally there now if they're subscribers. They're also available free to the public, but they're a month afterwards they get released to the public. So that's another form of crowdfunding, is having having people read the book on Patreon, which is one of the reasons why I bring it up so often. So it's subscription crowdfunding. That's how I look at it. Let's see. Amar says, I still love it, figure drawing, but have nowhere to practice. Well, obviously practicing during the quarantine kind of sucks. There's not really many places to do it. My figure drawing instructor is still holding classes on Zoom, where they actually have models posing for us. And that's a good way to go. But I'm sure you've heard of the Crocus Cafe YouTube channel, right? Where they've got timed models, and they've already got them posed, and you can draw from them. That's a good option. And honestly, once the quarantine lifts, they have, hang on, cat hair on my straw. I believe I've mentioned this before, but there's a group called the Gallery Girls, and they're organized by a figure drawing model, Jennifer Fabos Patton. She basically organized a lot of the models that she tends to pose with at different animation workshops, at like animation studios, at drawing galleries, at art galleries. She basically put together an organization where the models, and almost any given night in Los Angeles, there is figure drawing in LA. Not right now because of the quarantine, but even with this, the models are actually still doing virtual figure drawing sessions. So you could be drawing live from a model, but drawing from them on camera. My point being is that when the quarantine's over, if you can find the time, if you go to gallerygirls.org, they have their site there, and you can see there's lots of places to. I don't know if they have their past events listed there, but if they do, you can see how much work they were doing live on a regular basis. So for me, the hardest part, and the reason why most of the artists I talk to don't go to figure drawing classes, is just the time. They're too busy with whatever they're working on. They don't have time to do it. And I understand that, particularly as somebody who is drawing their comic much slower than they'd like to. But the benefit I have found in figure drawing classes, it has improved my draftsmanship so much that it feels essential to me. And I feel like I have to make time for it because it's what's led to the growth that I've had up till now. So I feel like I want to make the ankle on this boot just a little bit narrower, just so that you get that sense of like a woman's ankle just being a little bit more tapered as opposed to like a thick ankle. So it's a fine line where I am exaggerating compared to what's on the boot. I'm exaggerating. I'm narrowing it just slightly enough that I want it to still feel like the shape of that boot, but I want to slightly exaggerate this taper, give it just the slightest taper so it'll feel a little bit more feminine. You know what? Hang on. And I should move this reference right next to where I am drawing while I'm drawing it. And we are at about an hour here. So I'm going to draw for a few more minutes. We'll go like, another 5 those in while I wrap this up. Let's see here. Joseph says, I have stuff in my head, but I'm having trouble putting it on paper because I never drew in comic book style. I know with practice it will get better, and that drawing like Jim Lee doesn't come overnight. No, it does not. It takes many, many years of dedicated drawing. But you know what? For me, the way that I think about a lot of this stuff, and I'm standing like a broken record, but it comes down to the joy of drawing. Because I think the difference between someone who continues to draw and develop their skill to the level of a professional artist versus somebody who just drew for fun as a kid, I wish I could remember who it was, but I heard a woman, I believe it was a young animator, and she was giving a talk one time on she was giving an interview. And the point she made was that all of us drew as children. When we were kids, we all loved this, we all enjoyed it, and we drew all the time. And so she said that she always found it ridiculous when people would ask her, when did you start drawing? Because her answer is, well, when did you stop? And she didn't say it with an attitude like that. She said it with a much more pleasant attitude. It was a little aggro. Let me dial it back. The point being is that all of us drew as children. It's an integral part of your childhood, playing with our imagination and being creative and drawing weird, funky things. And I think the difference between the people who stick with it versus the people who just give up and go into non-creative fields, or even if you don't go into a creative field, if you continue to draw just as a hobby, because this, for me, I think, it's one of those things where I make income from it, but it's still not my predominant income. I think the difference between this, this is part of my overall business. It's just not the key driver. The difference is that when I loved drawing so much that I didn't stop when it started becoming more difficult, when I started to draw things that were more realistic. And I think a lot of people, once it goes past drawing for fun and now you're drawing to improve the craft, I think for a lot of people, that sucks the fun out of it for them. So the best thing that I can recommend to you is I hear what you're saying about how hard this is. And I know how hard it is because I've walked the same path and I'm walking the same path right now. I mean, I took what I would say was a perfectly good boot that I was drawing, and now I'm erasing it and trying to take this photograph of a boot I have here, and I'm trying to imagine that structure at this angle. I'm moving it around in my head, trying to get it right. I understand the challenges that you're facing, and I'm facing those exact same challenges. And what I'm saying is, this thing I'm doing right now that's hard, I'm enjoying it. It's tough, but it's like the thing I was talking about going to the gym earlier. It's a difficulty that I find invigorating, working this hard and developing a skill and pushing myself. And I think if you can find the joy in that work, then that's what will carry you through. The same way that your love of art has kept you drawing now, as opposed to when a lot of people, when they're kids, just drew for fun and then eventually gave up. The fact that, oh, wow, I just realized as I'm fixing this boot, I'm looking at this boot now. And if you compare the front line of this line that's going up the seam, if you compare that with the knee, this knee isn't even going to be necessarily on the page because it's going to get cut off. The trim of the page, there's a very faint blue line that's up here. So the knee is going to, you're still going to see part of it, but it's going to be right up by the trim. Point being is that the knee is not facing the same direction as the front of the shin. So as I draw this boot and fix it, it means I'm going to have to come up here and I'm going to have to fix this knee as well. And these are the kind of things that as you continue to make art, you realize, these are the things you learn to watch out for. In a certain way, I've been slowing down much more on this last issue than I have any other. Like, I've really slowed down a lot. But part of that is because, like that issue I just showed you with the knee, I'm perceiving mistakes that I didn't see before. And that's part of the learning process, is your perception grows. There were things that you may have thought were perfectly fine that a few years later when you're drawing, you look at it and you're like, that's why when we go back and look at our old drawings, we often hate them. Is because you can, as you improve, you can see mistakes you didn't see before. And part of me slowing down is I'm trying to fix mistakes that I just didn't perceive before, which means this takes longer. But it also hopefully means that the work itself is leveling up. And it means that the time that I'm taking to fix these mistakes that I didn't necessarily see before, those are going to lead to a better final issue than the issue before that and the issue before that. So it's worth it to me. It can seem frustrating, and I think people that have been waiting for me to wrap up the series are also frustrated. But in the end, as selfish as this sounds, I'm really drawing this comic book more for me than for anyone else. It's a story that I wanted to tell and I'm passionate about. And I want this final issue to be something that I'm going to be proud of when I look back years later. Like my first comic, Eye of the Gods, it is not a perfect comic book. There's definitely flaws I see in this now that make me cringe. I mean, flaws I see in that book now that make me cringe. But I did the best I could with the skill I had at the time, and I'm still proud of it for that. And I think if I didn't continue to grow and learn and then try to make the books better based on those things I learned, then I wouldn't be proud of the work. So the fact that I'm going slower, taking longer, it's not because I don't care. It's not that I don't want to deliver the book, the artwork and the stories in a timely fashion. It's that I want to be a better artist. And I want that not so I can sell more books or something where people will praise me. It's because it's a goal that I have. I'm passionate about this and I want to do the best work that I can. So Joseph says, I agree completely. The other day I watched the portrait I did just 2 years ago, and I was thinking to myself, who drew this? So LOL, because I got so much better at it. And yeah, that's the thing. as we continue to create art, we're going to learn and we're going to improve. And that's the good thing. We're supposed to improve. And I think that that's where the other part that I mentioned about appreciating where you learn and grow, and not beating yourself up on the places where you're like, oh yeah, well that didn't come out great. You're supposed to be better. You're supposed to look at the work you did a few years back and say, wow, well, I'm so much better now. I mean, there's times when I'll look at something I drew a few months ago and I'll be like, that was crap. What was I thinking? But that's okay. I'm always just trying to keep growing and learning. And hopefully that's what you guys will do too. Amar says, sometimes it can go in reverse. I was pretty good at photorealistic stuff for 20 years or so, and it still looks good. Oh, hey, I see Lego Studios in the chat. Good to see you. We're just about wrapping up here, but I'm glad you were able to make it in for the end. Yeah, Amar says, it depends on the subject. That's very true. The interesting thing that I find is sometimes I will go through periods where now the drawings are still coming out really, really bad. And I'm like, it feels like I have forgotten how to draw now. And I look at stuff that I drew a few weeks ago that was a lot better. But a lot of times that tends to be, and I can't remember what I was listening to, but I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about that recently. And that also is about where you're making a cognitive jump in perception, but you can't execute. You can't quite draw well enough to fix the problems that you're seeing. So that's the most frustrating thing, is when your perception grows and your hand hasn't caught up to it yet. That's the part that I think drives people crazy. But I've learned enough now that for the most part, when that happens, I relax. I know what it is that's happening to me. And I say, you've experienced this before. Don't freak out. Do the best you can, and then move on. And if you have time to go back and fix it and improve it later, great. If not, accept that this drawing that's less stellar than what you would like accept that that's just the best you could do at that time. But I will tell you that on this particular entire page, every single figure on this page, I've gone through and I've either taken a photograph of myself in a pose, or I've posed figures, or I grabbed some reference for the shot of Ariel holding the axe. I asked my wife to pose holding a hammer out in her hand, so that I could get the hand pose correctly. So for all these things, I found, again, I'm an imaginative artist, but when I draw something from my imagination that looks wonky, going and photographing reference so I can actually look at something and say, oh, this is what I'm doing wrong. Because a lot of times that's really all we need, is just to be shown what we're doing wrong. And in lieu of having an art instructor in front of you to teach you and critique your drawings, reference can serve that purpose for you. If you're trying to draw something and it's coming out bad, then go find a picture or take a photograph, take a selfie of what it is you're trying to draw, and then say, oh, then I can compare side by side with my drawing and say, oh, I just need to move this drawing here. This looks flat. I need to make it look more volumetric. I'm drawing these things like they're just meeting when I need to draw them like one is overlapping the other. There's all kinds of varieties of things to Wonky Art said in the chat, I heard wonky. Yes, I definitely, that's one of my favorite go-to words. So when talking about art, so your handle is a perfect handle. It's the thing that we all struggle with. So before I log off, I'm just going to show you here one more time so you can compare. Let me turn the layer off. So this is the boot I have now. In comparison to, in fact, let me move this over to the side a little bit. So turn that off, turn this back on. So this is the boot that I had before. And in fact, here, let me just move the whole thing over so I can have them on and off. Move this right here. So old boot, new boot. Old boot, new boot. So the old one was drawn from my imagination, and I realized, this really doesn't feel authentic to me. Let me grab a photo of it. And again, this isn't a case, this is where imaginative drawing and reference come in, because it's not like I had this boot sitting next to me in the exact pose that I'm doing. I'm having to combine observation with my imagination. I have to use my ability to perceive of what that object would look like turned to a different angle, but use my observation of what the structure is to try and make it look realistic. So, that's something right there. I think the biggest problem a lot of artists have is that no one shows us how to properly use reference. And for me, it wasn't until years, when I say years later, I mean, I'm in my 40s now, and I don't think I really understood how to use reference until maybe like 5 years ago. I really didn't. I've mentioned before, there's a book called Norman Rockwell, Behind the Camera, and I did a whole video on that. So if you want to look up more on using photo reference, do a search on my channel for Norman Rockwell, and that video will come up. Just understanding how to properly use reference will help both improve your work and decrease your frustration, because reference really does help you out. You may slow you down, but you're going to need to slow down to fix a crappy drawing. So in a long way, in a roundabout way, this speeds up your process, because you're going to spend more time frustrated in drawing and redrawing. Whereas if you just got the proper reference in the first place, that might take a little bit more time, but it'll take a lot less time than just drawing something and being unsatisfied with it multiple times. So King Crow is here. Caw, ahoy there, folks. All right, King Crow, thanks for popping in. We're just wrapping it up here. And again, as always, guys, I appreciate you joining me, being here, hanging out. If you want to support this channel, think of this as crowdfunding for the channel. And to keep these videos free, get a bunch of additional content, you can go to patreon.com/GERIMI. You can also sign up for my newsletter. That's newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you want to purchase copies of my books, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will forward you to my Amazon author page. So guys, I really appreciate you again hanging out. Great conversations in the chat. If you guys have any additional comments, please leave them there. I try to respond as quick as possible. That's it for now. Go be creative.